Translations of the Bible. What are they on about? So the first thing to know is that the Bible is written across a long time period. It's written in a lot of separate books that have now been compiled together, but weren't originally one big volume. And as such, it was written in a variety of languages as well. Broadly speaking, all the books written before Jesus were written in ancient Hebrew, ancient biblical Hebrew, with two exceptions that were written in Aramaic, a related language from a similar area. And then the New Testament books, which were written after Jesus, were all written in ancient Koine Greek. Now, the bits in ancient Hebrew and Aramaic, they're called the Old Testament. They're still accepted as part of the Hebrew Bible, but the New Testament is only accepted by Christians. So obviously, both of those languages are not languages that most people speak. In fact, they are not strictly dead languages. They were preserved, both languages were preserved to some extent as what's called liturgical languages, languages used as part of religious ceremonies. But certainly to a large extent, those languages fell out of everyday use for a long time. And certainly they are not spoken by most people now. So we need to translate those ancient texts if the everyday person is going to be able to understand them. So that's why we need translations. Now, how do translations actually work? How do the translations that I use, for example, on this channel, come about? So let's start, for example, with the King James Version, which is the translation I use on this channel. It's a fairly old English translation. It's one of the first, but not the first English translations of the Bible. It was done a few hundred years ago. It was commissioned by the King of England, and a whole group of scholars worked on it. They tried to go from the original languages to English at the time, more or less. It took a few choices. So whenever you're translating, you have to take a few choices. One of them is whether you're going to go like word for word or whether you're going to go for the vibe, for want of a better term. So what I mean by that, in the ancient Greek or Hebrew, you're going to have separate words. For example, you might have the Greek agape. Now, you can just pick for each of those words an English word that it corresponds to, fix up the grammar so that it still makes sense, and then there you go, you've got your translation. That fails for a few things. Most obvious example is idioms. You might have something in the Hebrew about girding up your loins. Now, when you translate that to English, it is a really weird statement. It doesn't really mean much. But if you take the context of the Hebrew, you know that in that culture, girding up your loins was a commonly used phrase meaning get ready to run, for example. So you might, instead of translating that word for word, you might just switch it out to an equivalent English phrase, like get ready to run, or like prepping himself, or something like that. So that's one big choice translations make. Another thing that distinguishes, say, the King James Version from the New King James Version or the New American Standard Bible is that over time, we've gotten a better appreciation of what the original text actually said. Now, how does this work? So, not only was the Bible a large collection of books written over a long period of time, we also don't have access to the originals. The original books that were written are now lost. That's not a deal breaker though, because those books were copied, and then those copies were copied, and so we have copies of copies of copies, and we have a lot of them. Over time, we've found more and more. Over time, we've also been able to study them more and more, and so that means we can look at those copies, see where there are slight differences, and try and pinpoint where those differences came in, and in doing so, figure out which differences are actually errors and not from the original, or which which verses were maybe inserted by a later writer. So this means that the King James Bible, which was written a few hundred years ago, doesn't take into account recent scholarship, which has shown certain verses probably weren't in the original Bible. Certain phrases probably were added later, or certain words just were maybe misscribed in some branch. Now, all those changes are quite minor. It's only in a few little bits that there'll be a difference like that. And if you've got a decent modern version, it'll generally have a footnote to tell you that. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of different Bible translations in English, and hopefully, whatever language you speak, there's going to be a decent translation for you. It's always a good idea to, if you can, get a couple of different translations, perhaps one that goes for the more literal approach and one that tries to get the vibe of metaphors and analogies and idioms a bit better, so that you can compare, or alternatively to get a Bible with good footnotes or a commentary that can tell you when girding up your loins is not about pulling your pants up, but an idiom used at the time.